Thank you, Tom Hammond, for being here today and to talk with us and to have a dialogue with us about the World Environment Day, which is June 5. But I saw on the website that there are a lot of events starting from today, June 4th, till at least June 9, and hopefully every day of our lives. So Tom Hammond has worked in the field of environment protection since the year 86. So quite a long time, with specialization in the area of biodiversity conservation. He began his career in Canada and has worked in many countries around the world for NGOs like CARE International, WWF, World Conservation Union, to name a few of them. No? And since 2010, you've been working for the United Nations Environment Program, and you just finished a 4-year posting at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization based in Rome. And you're currently the Secretary of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel to the Global Environment Facility based in Washington. So Tom, welcome. I'm really honored to make this interview with you. And
thanks, Véronique. Very happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the theme of this year.
Well, the UN has as you know very well, the UN has a whole series of these international days to mark important events, important aspects of the UN's work. And tomorrow is UN Environment Day. And of course, it's an annual event on June the 5th, and it's hosted by the UN Environment Program. And every year it's hosted by a member state, and this year it's Pakistan. But the theme this year is ecosystem restoration. And that is because the UN last year, at the last General Assembly, announced that it would have, this would be the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. I think as even people who don't work in the field of environment, I think we're beginning to realize just how much nature around us, let's not talk about ecosystems, let's just talk about nature, just how much it's under threat these days, how much nature is really unraveling around us because of human activities and just because of our demands on food production, on production of everything, and all of that has an impact on the environment and nature. And we're hoping that we can, over the next 10 years, we can bring that back into balance.
Yeah, thank you. And so it's been interesting talking with another colleague of us to understand how, of course, I'm talking here on behalf of IBF, which is the International Breathwork Foundation, and we join and we support the Sustainable Development Goals also. So for us who are breathers, and of course everybody on earth is a breather, even animals and plants and everything. But sometimes we think we take it for granted. No, we don't realize how we are how this connection with nature is essential, not for our survival in one way. And us, we also say it's not only for our survival, it's for our emotional and mental and psychology well-being. No, so what would you say to our breather populations about, I don't know, maybe the current situation and where we go to, or in a hopeful status, no, and a hopeful message.
I for me, it's always been obvious that there's a very direct connection between we as humans and nature around us. We're not apart from this. We cannot exist apart outside of nature. The only reason we have, if you want to go back billions of years. The only reason we have a breathable atmosphere in the first place is because of nature, is because of the environment around us. And how many times in your work, Veronique, and the work of your colleagues in IBF, how many times have you, as part of your practice, professional practice, or just simply, going outside, next to the ocean or in a forest or in, just out in nature and just breathing in the air, feeling, wow, does that ever feel good?
Mm.
As compared to, sitting in an office building or, sitting in a room where the air is filtered and circulated and climatized in some fashion. You really feel that difference. And that's what nature's all about. Every breath we take is produced by the forests around us, the oceans, because oceans are alive essentially, and the soils under our feet. That living layer of planet Earth, which is this tiny, thin layer on the surface of the planet, but that living layer basically produces all of the oxygen that we breathe, and quite frankly, it produces everything else that we need.
Mm. Like what, for example? In
Food.
addition, yeah, food, course,
Everything we eat,
mm-hmm.
all of the water we drink,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, most of the products that we need, wood, paper, anything, imaginable around you, with the exception of things, that we mine. But honestly, that ultimately comes from nature as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I also saw in the theme of this year that they were talking in the webpage, no, of the words like to restore, we need to reimagine.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in the conscious breathwork environment, we are very good in linking the power of the breath and the power of imagination, which means
Mm-hmm.
I'm visualizing already what
Right.
I would like, not what I would like to see in the future. I'm visualizing and inspiring the reality, like if it's now, like if it's has already happened.
Yeah, I think one part of that visualization is about your own personal well-being.
Mm.
You're visualizing, I believe, what you want for yourself, and you want to be healthy, you want to be whole, you want to be feeling, feeling healthy, and both physically and mentally and spiritually. And I'm absolutely, it's not just a belief, this is something I know in every cell of my body, that you cannot be, ultimately, I don't think you can be completely well in that sense individually, unless that environment around you is equally, um, uh, being cared for and equally, um, uh, you know, in a situation where it is not under threat. If the
Mm.
environment around you is under threat, but you're doing everything you can to reinforce your own personal well-being, well, I think it's going to be undermined ultimately by the fact that the environment around you is under threat as well.
Yeah, right. And so this restoration plan that they have, what kind of information do you have about that, except for, of course, planting trees and things that
Hmm.
the majority of the population would say, no, or would guess, I
Sure.
guess.
Yes. Well, this is going to happen, at a a variety, a wide variety of levels. Governments obviously will be heavily involved in this, because that's who the UN works with. They work with
Mm.
governments. But people will be involved, communities will be involved, the private sector will be involved. Many institutions and organizations, particularly in the private sector, are beginning to wake up to this reality that we do not exist, and our economy cannot exist, and our society cannot exist, and we as individuals cannot exist outside of nature. We're
Yeah.
within it. And so there's plenty of things that are going to be happening, like large scale reforestation work, restoration of mangrove forests, a lot of soil restoration in agricultural systems. So there's going to be a lot of this work going on all over the place. But we as individuals can do quite a lot as well. If you happen to have a little bit of land somewhere, you can give part of that back to nature. Even if you don't have that, your part of your balcony could be given back to nature in a sense. There's plenty of work, and of course, there's also organizations that need our help that are doing this kind of work as well.
Where I'm living, we are, of course, one thing is nature itself, and the other thing is stop spoiling nature. So that's probably the action.
Yes.
Every human being needs to be.
Exactly. That's doing very simple things like, recycling your trash, or, walking instead of taking your car, or cycling instead of taking your, very simple things like that. All of those things add up.
There are a lot of ideas, interesting ideas that the UN has produced. I know there is an app that you can follow. Yes. Also, and making, which is in a way, because I think many people don't do anything because they think they feel helpless, and they think, who am I? No, this little seed, or this little herb in a huge ecosystem. What I do doesn't make a difference. But if
believe me, Véronique, I read the science every day on this, and it's hard not to be overwhelmed and dismayed by all of this. And it's, in many respects, it's a lot easier for me just to go and bury my head in the sand somewhere and just try to ignore all of this, but I can't. And we're not asking everyone to be an expert in this, of course, but just to be a little bit aware of our own individual actions do have an impact well beyond where we are. Think a little bit when you're in the supermarket and you're, just buying food. A lot of that food comes from the other side of the planet, and it took a lot of resources to get all the way around to you in the supermarket. Think about that a little bit, and if maybe you could think about, well, maybe I'm going to buy something from my local community here, or my local farmer, a few kilometers away, or even someone in my country, or, that's something that makes just that alone makes a huge difference, and it tastes better too.
Yeah, and then if everybody or many people do like that, then the big company needs to adjust anyway.
Yes,
which we see that. I think it's a good news that we already see that in the supermarkets.
Yes,
like people ask for bio, for local, and then I see in the big supermarket here that it's labeled. No, this is coming. I'm now in Belgium. This is coming from Belgium, and so they name it. The other thing I do, for example, is like I don't. Now we have a big storm coming. We don't. When I see it's under plastic, I don't buy it, and I take when I can, no, of course. But the vegetables, for example, if they are under plastic, I don't buy it. I just like that or put it. Anyway, there are a lot of things, but I think the message is more like when you start doing these little things, you feel good.
Yes.
Because it brings you a sense of contribution and a sense of being coherent with yourself.
Yes. Yes, and I think this is so important and relevant for the work you're doing in IBF, because it begins I think, and I think this might be valuable for IVF, it begins to connect the work you're doing to the, it's incredibly important for the individuals involved in this practice, in this work, and I'm very well aware of that. But I think it's an added benefit if we can begin to think about how through your practice in IVF, how that then can be connected to the world around you. And absolutely through the breath. I mean, there's no question about it. In my, every molecule of air that you're breathing comes from nature.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we hear a lot about the rising levels of carbon dioxide and the rising levels of methane and all of these gases that are in the air that we're breathing. That every single time we breathe, we're breathing in carbon dioxide and methane and all of these nitrous oxides and all of these other gases that are just mixed up in the atmosphere, that are driving climate change, that are basically they're heat trapping gases, and it's heating up the planet, and that has all sorts of ramifications. And on top of all of that, the oxygen that we really need is going down, because essentially we're impacting nature so much. All of those ecosystems, that one of their functions is to produce oxygen. And as those ecosystems begin to decline and begin to be fragmented, and their health and well-being declines, then the oxygen that they're producing is also having an impact. And that's beginning to decline. We're seeing this, and this is the stuff I read about in science, and
Yeah.
it gives me nightmares.
Yeah. So it's a little bit like if a human being is breathing, unconsciously, just shallowing breathing, not being very just for surviving, say, and
Yes.
even is eating one way, or is not feeling well, or is even sick,
Right.
I would say, no. And this human being is breathing, his ecosystem is at the end is being toxic all over, or
Right.
the breathing, or what he takes and what he gives back to the outside, but to its body and also to the outside is not high quality, I would say.
No, exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's like the earth, no, the earth receive
Right.
whatever from us, and then restore, and then give back, no, give back this oxygen.
Yes.
They take the carbon dioxide and give back the oxygen, I guess, as a whole, and we do
Yes.
those things. So it's like we should really dance together. So if we as breathers, you correct me if I'm wrong, no, but if we as breathers are making this dance elegant and with grace and with gratitude and with
Awareness,
conscious
just simple awareness. Yeah.
that I'm thank you for the air you are giving me, and I'm giving you back gratitude, love, recognition of all these high quality vibration, no, of values. And then there is something of more quality that the earth can recycle, or can, I don't know.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that consciousness, that level of consciousness then becomes the starting point, the basis upon which we begin to make changes in our daily lives. Because you simply, I don't think you can. I don't think in your practice, I do not think you can confine that to 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day. It's your life, and this is how you live. And being that consciousness, I would hope doesn't exist during that period when you're concentrating on your breath practice. It is part of your entire life. And that's what we're also saying, is that we are so intimately inextricably connected to nature, that it is, that awareness, of that, just that simple knowledge that we are so, you know, completely connected to nature, is the basis upon which we can begin saying, if I do this and this in my daily life, in my daily practice, it makes a huge difference to the world around me, and ultimately to my own personal well-being.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, thank you. It's very inspiring. And so what would you say, what you, as the expert, what would you offer, no, not offer, what would you ask for from people who are like us, no, or the breathers? I mean, the
Yes,
ones who are
yes.
listening to her are usually in the conscious,
Mhm.
are aware, I would say, no? It's a
I've
difficult question, maybe, but
Yeah, I mean, the message I would have, I think the main message I would, it's very similar message I have for everyone, but particularly for this community, I would think just, as you just mentioned a moment ago, and just don't forget that where the air comes from, and that with every single breath you are connected to nature around you. Don't ever forget that. If that can be just a part of your daily practice in the breath, I think that is a huge step, because that level of consciousness will lead to many, many other positive things that you can do, even unconsciously,
mm-mm.
that will help to improve the well-being of nature around you. I know you're doing all this work to improve your own personal well-being, which is fantastic. But all I'm asking is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that also be connected to the well-being of the environment around you.
But I'm gonna give you a good news.
Okay.
It's now I think we've moved. It's true that maybe, of course, I'm not talking about for everybody in the community, but I'm seeing, and in the breathwork community, but also in other awareness community and people getting conscious,
Mhm.
that we've moved, like I would say, like in the 20th century, we would probably be more focused of healing our own stuff, no, and
Of
what,
course.
and my own well-being and all my stuff. But I really see how we have moved into a community well-being,
Hmm.
into and I think this crisis of the COVID, which is of course a terrible thing, but at the same time it has forced us to see the importance of the air, and to see the importance of our breath. People are now realizing with a mask here most of the day that how oh my God, I'm not breathing in the same way, no. So suddenly we are seeing that. So there are a lot of movements in our breathwork community where we start to breathe for not, when I say community, I'm saying the environment, I'm saying the people around, the nature around, the house around us, the country, the society, the politics, the whole earth in a global way, no. So for example, I'm in a group since there are several groups like that in the world, and I'm in one since October, and I've just started one in French, where we after doing our little own meditation with the breath, we start inspiring. When I say inspiring, it's really the world, like inhaling, no, inhaling the qualities of the environment and the world we want to see, and then we exhale it to the whole nature in
Ah,
this, imagining, even we know that in neuroscience, imagining that it's already there,
yes.
not like in the future, no, it's like this possibility is here, so we're going to inhale it, and we're going to make it
Fantastic.
real in our body for the world and for the people around. So that's the good news I wanted to give you.
Well, that's fantastic. I would just say to just go a tiny, tiny step further and connect that that neural sciences that you're focusing on there to the psychology of human behavior. Just
Okay.
take it one tiny step further, because if we can just nudge human behavior a little bit, it will create a tsunami of effect for the environment.
So
And
it's like hooking the human behavior to this consciousness, no?
absolutely, exactly.
It's true. It's true. That's a little harder.
It is a little harder.
It's a little harder. I can see it in myself, no? It's like, oh my God, I want to be coherent
Yes.
in every aspect, and I'm still incoherent.
It's
I'm
funny.
still doing things that I would like not to do.
It's funny, I've spent more than 30 years in this field, and I trained in the natural sciences, and I've worked in the natural sciences and its application in environmental management, very technical focus, for so many years. But ultimately, if we're going to fix the problems we have around us, it's the solution isn't there.
Yeah.
The solution is with individual, nudging and influencing individual human behavior. And that's why this discussion is so important. That's why the work you're doing is so important.
Mm-hmm. And then you were saying, which is interesting, because of course because of your profession, even if you wanted to hide, it's impossible. You have to be there, no? And looking at it's almost like you are looking at the tsunami, the potential tsunami that can arrive in front of you. So how do you manage that? I'm interested. How do you manage that physically and psychologically? And
it's a mixture of things. I avoid drugs and alcohol, but just getting into nature myself whenever I can really is, and taking full advantage of that is, for me, is so important, and just being connected to that, and that for me is, and constantly reconnecting myself to that is incredibly important.
So do you sometimes feel when you do this connection, I suppose this connection with nature, like you're talking about, is kind of relaxing and removing your probably stress, anxiety, or
yes, absolutely,
despair, yes. I guess sometimes you may have. And how do you tell us a little bit what, with this scientific this consciousness that you have, no? It's like I can imagine that a normal person looking at the star is not the same thing as an astronomer looking at the star. So you are an expert in nature. So what else, which that we may not perceive, do you see or do you feel when you are?
Well, one thing that we see a lot of is an increasing level of evidence of what we call, in the work that I do, we call tipping points. These are, almost points of no return, in the sense where, let me give you an example. The Amazon rainforest is this huge, very complex forested area, mostly in Brazil, but all through the central part of South America. And that forest is fragmenting around the edges because of food production, mostly food, some timber as well, and other, production, and the forest is beginning to decline. That huge forest, and that produces probably about 20% of the air we breathe. It sucks up and contains a lot of the carbon dioxide, the burning of fossil fuels that we burn every single day for our energy and our cars and everything. A lot of that gets sucked up into the Amazon rainforest, about 20% of it. So it's incredibly important for the global environment to try keep it stable, because if it becomes unstable, very simple things that we take for granted, like how we produce our food, like you know things like rice and wheat and corn, all of these are the staples that we eat. The entire Earth's population is dependent on those three grains.
Mm.
And unfortunately, those grains are grown in a very narrow temperature horizon. If the temperature gets above that, they can't grow, or they're so stressed that they don't produce as much as they normally should produce, which means grain production start going down, which means people start going hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really, really huge problem. And that's why, something like the Amazon rainforest is, and that's just one of hundreds of examples, but it's a big one that we all know. As that forest begins to fragment, as it begins to shrink, it creates its own weather patterns because it's so huge. It's constantly, the evapotranspiration and the rain coming down there, it's amazing. It creates its own weather. But as that forest shrinks, it will stop doing that. So the rains will stop or become more uneven. The forest gets even smaller. It dries out. And when it dries out, it will burn. And eventually that forest will disappear. Mm. In the past, tens of thousands of years ago, there wasn't a forest there. So these things will change all the time. It changes all the time. But what will happen is that it creates a lot of problems for us because temperatures will start to change globally. As I said, things like basic things that we take for granted, like food production, will become much, much more difficult. And it's going to cause a lot of, when we talk about stress for the environment, that has a direct connection to stress on society, stress on our political systems, our governance systems, our economy. And because it's all connected together, it's all based on that. So those are the things that keep me up at night.
Yeah. So going back to you walking in the nature to kind of calm down this perspective, that you have to look at with a lot of courage. And I really I do feel really, when I'm listening to you, how all your guys, looking at that and dealing with that, have a lot of courage, because it would be much easier to leave it to other people,
Yeah.
And we do that. We leave it to you.
Yes, exactly. And it's I have to say, it's a very, very small group of people that are really focused on this and are really, really aware of what's going on. So anything we can do, anything you can do to sort of, through your own work, so it reinforces your own work and also increases the level of awareness of these types of things that are happening and how it directly relates to your own practice in IVF. I think that's incredibly important. It's whenever we're able to ground this a little bit in our own lives, in our own daily practices, I think that's so important, because it's not just some, a technical expert talking out here. It really becomes embedded in your daily lives. And
we need to make it practical, not.
Yeah.
So one thing, for example, which is interesting, is to deal with the anxiety that, as breath workers, we are dealing a lot with. We are helping people to manage their breath, so they can stay balanced inside, and they can recuperate their balance when they get stressed. And I know there is a climate and anxiety syndrome. I don't know how you call it, no? And then with the pandemic, it's even worse.
Yes.
There is more fear and more anxiety. So the breath is helping a lot of that. And then I'm wondering, with you talking with you now, that if we are helping, I'm going to take that challenge, and I'm going to take that challenge of how can the breathing we do and the awareness there we do can go into the behavior change. So
Right.
I'm gonna investigate that for myself
Okay.
and give it to my followers. But then I'm also interested in if we start to creating our in our own body. When I say body, I'm talking house, even in our home, no, a coherent, no stress, but flowing, give and receive, because it's a give and
Yeah.
receive, no? Each time we
Hmm.
take a breath, it's a give and receive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe that's more balanced way of living with myself, just with myself to start with,
Hmm.
may have an impact
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
on
Yeah, I
the
mean,
environment.
we're only responsible for ourselves at the
Mm-mm.
end of the day. We're not responsible for anyone
Yeah, yeah,
else.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
just
And at the
responsible
same
for us.
time, we are in one way.
Well, I mean, we're family members, we're community members, and of course we're concerned about people around us, but ultimately we're only responsible for ourselves. And if we start there, that is huge. And then if we go a little bit further and try to wherever we can to impart some of that thinking, that level of consciousness with our family and our colleagues and our friends around us, our community members around us, and that's the tsunami I'm talking about.
Mm-mm.
And I just want to say this is important for everybody in the world. There's no question about that. I just want to say that we in Europe and North America in particular, we're so privileged to have this opportunity to do this. We're so privileged, that we have the time to concentrate on our own personal well-being through the breath and through other practices. So many people in the world don't have that
Mm.
opportunity, because they spend all of their time just simply surviving,
Yeah.
making sure they have enough food and water and, clothing and shelter. They're really focused on the basics. And I think if we can also, I don't want to overburden people, but, at the same time, I just want to remind people that we are so incredibly privileged to have this opportunity to do so. Let's take advantage of it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Mm. So, Tom, what kind of message of hope or how do you see yourself personally, the situation, or to end in a positive note, if it's possible,
Yeah,
if it's
it is.
possible.
It is possible because there are there's always positive. There are positive things happening out there. It's not all gloom and doom. There's a lot of that, unfortunately. But I'm encouraged by, I know the current pandemic that we're all experiencing, the many aspects of that, both personally and our communities around us. And I know that has, impacted so many people's lives in so many negative ways. At the same time, I'm encouraged by how quickly we've managed to respond to this. That gives me hope that
Mhm.
when we do realize, oh, there really is a problem here, we can respond pretty quickly.
Okay, yeah.
Um, uh, and that really is encouraging. I want to make sure that hopefully we don't go beyond some of those critical tipping points that I talked about,
Mhm.
because it will be very, very, very difficult to make a U-turn if we get beyond some of these points. And we're very close to those, unfortunately. Um, but I'm really encouraged, and this is why I think a lot of this boils down to individual human behavior and how we behave in communities and respond in communities, because that will shift the balance very, very quickly. And I think with as we our consciousness and our realization of these issues becomes more embedded in our daily lives and daily practices, that will change things dramatically, and that's what gives me hope. You know, the sciences tell us what's going on. They provide the, you know, the dials on the machine to tell us how things are going, but it's not going to. It's what's in our heads and in our daily lives and daily practices and how we respond to things. That's what's going to change things. And I really do think that we have the capacity within us to respond very, very quickly, and in a conscious and in a loving way to you know, some of these challenges around us, both in the environment and in society.
Mm. No, I have another. I have another question. Do we still have time?
Sure.
I have another little question, because you're talking about these tipping points, and you say, so the ones who are critical, and now suddenly I'm like, oh, of course I can imagine, no, the ocean and so on, but in terminology that the normal population would understand it, what would be those? Not all of them, but some that come to your mind.
Right. Yeah. The biggest one, the biggest one is temperature.
Okay.
Because that drives so many other things.
Like you were saying, the agriculture and.
Yeah, because it has an effect on rainfall. You know, you said there's a big storm coming.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the daily weather here. I'm talking about the long-term forces that drive the global climate over centuries. And one of the challenges we have is that, you know, as in our, you know, the way we live and the way we produce energy and stuff like that, and the way we produce things that we need uses an enormous amount of energy, and a lot of that energy is provided through fossil fuel, which is burned, and that goes into the air that we breathe, and that over time increases the temperature, the average temperature right around the globe. And what that does over time, and those gases, unfortunately, they stay in there. They stay in the atmosphere for a long, long, long period of time. Nature over time pulls that out of the atmosphere and recycles it and so on. But it can take centuries for that to happen. Mm. And we're getting to a point where those gases that we're putting into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides mostly, and it's all from burning fossil fuels primarily, or the vast majority of it is. It's getting to a point where we've got so much of it there, and it's going to remain in the atmosphere for a century at least, that it will, even if we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, we're still going to be having, the temperature is going to keep on rising for more than a century.
Wow. Because
we've already put this stuff in the atmosphere. Mm. So this is the kind of, and we're very close to, we're talking in the order of a decade, maybe 2 decades, where we will literally be on the point of no return. Okay. Where, because these forces are so huge, they're planetary in scale, that when they really become unleashed, they become self-reinforcing. And as temperature goes up, things like the permafrost in the far north begins to melt, and it begins to release enormous amounts of methane. And that methane is a very, very, very potent gas, which further drives climate change. So you see, as this temperature goes up a little, it passes, and then all of a sudden it just rolls. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, right. Basically.
So we need to invent now a snowball that it's a positive one.
Exactly. That's right.
That leads to another.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
And there's, like I say, simply investing in nature. And like I say, if you have a backyard, you know, plant a few trees.
mm,
If you or don't do anything to it, just let nature take care of it. If you have if you have if you can contribute to organizations that do this sort of work, try to
yeah,
restore
exactly.
and protect
Yeah.
nature, fantastic. And buy local,
Mm,
ride your bike,
mm,
instead of taking the car, if you can, or public transportation if that's safe. um, do those sorts of things if you can. And those have, as I say, that has a huge difference.
mm.
It has a huge cumulative effect.
And I guess I was wondering if you have some data about this period where we were all confined, not the last one, but in the spring last year,
Yes,
2020, when we stopped moving, when we stopped doing all these things. What did
yes,
you see? Because
yeah.
we heard a lot of things and videos and so on. And was
Yes,
it real?
like
Was it real that suddenly we
like
saw less pollution and
yes, so like we were seeing a lot more wildlife coming into cities and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, 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 exactly. Yes, there were examples of that all over the world. The dolphins came back to the canals in Venice and so on. Yes, there were lots and lots and lots of anecdotal examples of that. But I think the really important thing was that yes, for a time, for about 6 or 8 months, the amount of uh, carbon dioxide and some of these other gases I mentioned that were generating all the time, it all leveled off. And it was great to see that, and that's what I mean by that's so encouraging, because we saw how quickly this can change, with just a simple, and I know that the pandemic is not the way we want to, bring that change about. Absolutely not. But it did have an incredibly beneficial effect
Mm.
on some of these things that are driving global environmental change. And we in the field, we thought, wow, this is really, really terrific. It's amazing to see how quickly that can happen. Now, in the last few months, it's gone back up again.
Yeah.
And all of the factories have started up again. Air travel is restarted, and all the global economy is revving back up again. And as it revs, we start to see energy use climbing, and of course all of the negative effects that come along with that.
So you're saying that because I think it was like 2 months or 3 months that we stopped has an effect had an effect for longer and longer period of time than just these 3 months.
It's it hasn't
Is
had
it?
a long-term effect. No,
No, no, no.
it's short-term. It as I say, um, it probably, it probably globally, it probably gave us a little bit of extra time to try to, maybe 6 months, maybe a year,
Mm.
uh, to help us, think about and enact the kind of changes we need um, in the global economy, basically, to really begin to turn the corner on some of this global environmental change that we're experiencing right now.
But
It bought us a little bit of time.
yeah, but
Uh,
what you say, what's more interesting of in what you're saying is the possibility that we saw.
yes, yeah, that's
That's
the
probably
incredible.
the most incredible
Yes,
experience, no? Because we would
by
never have
far,
done an experience like that without this situation.
by far, exactly. What it's taught us, I think, more than anything else, is that there are different ways that we can live.
Yeah,
The current way we
also.
live is not necessarily the way we have to live in the future. There are other ways that we can live that aren't so bad. They're actually, I think in many respects are less stressful. Um, Maybe we won't have need for as much of the breath work in future if we can find a lifestyle that's less stressful. I think that might be an interesting result. But I think, you know, it's just our lives are so stressful. You know, the daily commute that people would take to go to work for, you know, people who were working in offices and so on, or whatever. I mean, it would be an hour sometimes or longer to get to work, and then coming back, and most of those people were all of a sudden they're working at home, or if they can work at home, they were working at home. And you know, it's incredible how that, you know, little changes in our lives like that can make such a huge difference. That's why I'm so encouraged by this.
I always thought that what makes it so difficult to change, maybe individually, but also especially as a society, and businesses, and companies, and industries, and all of that, is because they're, like you were saying, no, maybe we won't need much breathing in the future. It's like, oh my God, so if my my way of living, or my money, or all of that is based on this industry, I cannot let that go, no? So and I've always been thinking that one of the key things that the world or the United Nations could support, or the government could support, is all those businesses to have a transition time where they can, if what I produce here is no longer needed because the people are better, let's recycle and do something. For example, in our case, breath workers, I mean, I usually do the breath for the pleasure. So fine, if I don't have clients in crisis, we will just breathe for the pleasure.
Yes, of course.
For example, no.
Right.
But then, of course, if I'm a medical,
even better.
If I'm a medical person and I don't have any more patients sick, maybe I can recycle in focusing in creative way of being healthy. And if I'm business with fossil, which I think they are doing, they are not finding new ways of doing the engine of how can we call it, the cars and all of that, no?
Yes, of course.
New ways. So it's like a challenge of reinventing yourself in producing and in living out of something that's not based on lack and on unwell-being, but new things that is enhancing.
Yes, exactly. And it can make our lives so much better in so many ways.
I had a teacher at one point, and we're going to close very soon. I had a teacher at one point who was saying, during our courses, he was saying, now imagine that the planet is totally healed. It's exactly the way you want. People are not fighting anymore. No need for arms, no need for medicine, because we are all healthy and feeling well with ourselves. We are feeling well with the nature around. What work would you do? What is the activity that you would like to offer to the world? And it's interesting to have that in mind, because then we can let go of the pathological things of fixing something that's not well with the planet, no?
Yes,
So it was interesting questions.
Yes. And you know, it's fantastic that those questions are being put. You know, we deal with those questions every single day, you know, and all day long. But it's, you know, what we want, and this is, you know, why we're, you know, World Environment Day exists, and Earth Day, and these sorts of things, is to get the word out beyond our community, because if it stays in our community, you know, we haven't done our jobs.
Exactly.
And we certainly haven't done our job in the UN. And you know, the UN, its members are governments, are countries, but you know, its real focus is on people. Exactly. And businesses and communities, because that's what creates the countries that we live in the first place. These aren't, some construct that it's basic, and it's evolving all the time. So that's where we need to really affect change, and it starts with people, starts with individuals.
So we have a big challenge, but I guess challenge is also can give some energy.
Yeah. Yes.
When we hold hands, like you were saying, like what happened in 2020 and 2021.
Yes, exactly. Yes, absolutely. It's really, it's been an incredibly difficult period in the last 12 or 14 months, but it's shown us what we can accomplish when we work together.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice way of ending. Tom, what would you say?
Yeah. And I just want to reinforce, Véronique, I really appreciate the work that you're doing in IVF, and the fact that you are reaching out and beginning to incorporate some of this wider consciousness into the work you're doing. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Tom, very much. And if I have new insights about how to mix breathing and the behavior, I'll let
behavior, you know. Yeah.
Starting from myself.
Okay, great.
So lots of blessing from where you are in the States, and thank you, Zoom, for being able to connect the world. And yes. We talk to you soon. And
thank
all
you,
the
Véronique.
all the blessings for all your team and for all the countries and the people participating, because those are the one, each of them making a difference. And like you're saying, we have a beach is made of every little grain or little
grain of sand. Exactly. Yes.
Sand. So
yes.
Thank you so much, Tom. And
thank you.
Yeah.